everyone on this call is one of our supporters, and you're what enabled us to keep the Highline open. I never had to say reopen the Highline. I never thought that's something we'd be talking about. And so you're the reason we're going to be able to reopen the Highline. And so we also have a few, it's great, we have a few of our staff on the line too. The photos, can y'all see some photos that are on right now?
Scanning.
Okay, so these are some photos that were just taken yesterday or the day before of the Highline. So, I mean, this is what I saw walking over here at Gansevoort. And no one has been up, the gardeners haven't been up on the Highline since about mid-March when we closed, because we had to close because of social distancing. We couldn't do that on the Highline. They're gonna actually start going up on Monday, so they'll be up in a few days. The plants are in great shape, as you can see. We've been really sort of blessed that we had a cool, wet spring. And you can see, if you look in the middle, you can see where the plants are growing through the grading of the flyover. And we were about halfway through cutback, so you can also look on your left. Well, on that one, you can see some of the plants that didn't get cut back. So it's sort of an interesting case where normally we cut everything back in the spring. We were halfway through that when we closed. So it's one of the things that the Highline is going to look different. I think it's going to look great. And then the big question is, when are we going to open? We're working with the city on that. We have to figure out a plan to be able to, and we've been trying to think about all these different scenarios. We're going to have to figure out how to reduce occupancy so people can social distance. So it'll likely be reduced numbers. It's tricky because we're a building, and so we have over a dozen entrances that we're going to have to staff. We can't close any of them off because they're all fire. We need them for fire escapes. So I hope it's this summer, and I'll probably have a better update probably middle of next month. But I can tell you that is our main priority is, you know, how do we open it as soon as possible, but make sure we keep it safe for visitors and staff. And in here, we were also in the middle of the art deinstall. So luckily, not all the art was deinstalled. So this is one of, I think, 2 or 3 pieces that's still up, this Sam Falls piece. And one of the benefits, you know, of this time has really been connecting with a lot of our neighbors. And we just had a call with Alec Poots at the Shed, and we've been talking to Adam Weinberg about, you know, how we can work together as we all reopen and then going forward. You know, I think we're going to need each other more. We're going to have to do more with less, and that's the case of all the culturals in the neighborhood and all over the city. So it's great to have partners at each end. I think that's all on my side. I think I'm going to turn it over to Cecilia. So Cecilia Alemani is the Donald Mullen Curator of Art. What's the, I now, I don't have it on my screen. Chief Curator? What are you, Cecilia? She's the master. She's in charge. She's, my favorite is people always come to me and say, oh, I have an artist, you know, that wants, can you tell Cecilia? And I've suggested hundreds of artists to Cecilia, and Cecilia is always very polite, but has never shown any artist I've suggested. So she is the true master of the Highline. And it was probably one of the most important hires we ever did. We had, I think, a good program to begin with, but she has taken it to a completely another level, and she's one of the reasons I love coming to work. So Cecilia, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you for the nice introduction. Were you saying something?
Oh, no.
No. Thank you all for being here. I'm sorry I don't see you, but I know you're there. I want to welcome and thank Jordan for being here. I'm very excited about our conversation. And before we dive in, I just have a few also thank yous to make. First, I want to acknowledge the entire Highline team that has been working remotely so hard also to put these amazing presentations together. The art team, of course, with our amazing team with Jordan Banky, Henry Murphy, Melanie Kress, and Janelle Grace. I want to also acknowledge the people that also helped us make the mural possible, including Morgenstern Capital and Canvas Property Group, and Colossal Media, that is the company that painted the mural. During this talk, we'll chat for about half an hour, but throughout the conversation, please feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen if you like to ask questions or just send comments, and we'll try to answer all of your questions at the end of the talk. And throughout the talk, we'll also show some pictures, some images of Jordan's work, and also some little videos. And I am actually going to start by showing you a little snippet of a video, part of a documentary that R21 did on Jordan, which I think is a great introduction to you and to your work. So just hold on a second.
Coming, you guys. You've been in this whole journey with me, and it means a lot. My whole life. Right? Yes. Yeah. Congratulations. Thank you.
I consider myself to be more of an introvert than extrovert. I can flip on, like adrenaline can kick in, and I'm able to perform extroversion really well. And so I often try to find my kindred spirits in the world, and usually it's like somebody who's kind of standing off to the side. There's a certain amount of mindfulness that it requires to slow down enough to really feel what it is to be present with someone in a moment.
Thank you, Melanie. I love starting with this video because I think it really captures your personality and your energy, and I'm really excited to be here today talking about your practice and your project for the Highline, which had opened in mid-December, and that was on view, well, it's still on view, of course, but until the Highline closed in mid-March. But before we talk about the Highland Project, I'd love to go back to the beginning and start from when if there was a specific moment in which you understood that you wanted to become an artist.
Oh, I think the specific moment, I was just joking with my students recently as we were winding up the semester that I didn't use the word artist to describe myself. I don't think until maybe into the middle of my Yale graduate experience. I was really hesitant to use that as a phrase. I felt like there was a seriousness to that kind of title or labeling that I didn't see myself as being a part of that history per se, the history as I knew it of what artists were and what they could be, that I had always, though, as long as I can remember, been inclined to like make things. I was always baking for my family, or I would be knitting, or I had a little craft corner and all I wanted was my mom to get things from the craft supply store, Michael's, and I could glue things together that I found great joy in the oasis and the stillness I found in the process of making things. So I think my passion for art and my inclination towards the visual language was always there, but it wasn't until I fell in love with the material of paint, which happened in undergraduate school, that I was like, ooh, this is something I haven't experienced before, and I'm really quite in love, and I would love to figure out a way to kind of keep this as a part of my repertoire, my life moving forward. I just didn't think that it could be my like full-time career.
And what did you study as an undergrad?
I was studying sociology and anthropology for the first 3 years of my undergraduate degree. And then I studied in Italy, in Cortona, off the coast of Tuscany, in Tuscany. And that was a really transformative experience. That's when I first discovered oil paint, and I came back from that trip my junior year, and that's when I changed my major. I had my like awakening that ultimately it was a liberal arts degree, and I was going to get all the skills. It was going to be a BA, not a BFA, so I could study anything, and I would have all the skills that I needed to successfully pursue whatever I wanted in life. And yeah, that's kind of where it started.
And was your family and your like closer environment supportive of your choice of becoming an artist?
Yes and no. I think that it's terrifying for anybody to say, like, I want to become an artist. There's a very rare few who know someone who's living and working as a professional artist. And I definitely was not one of those rare few who knew somebody who was in this profession. So I didn't have a roadmap to like what that could be like, nor did my parents, although my family has always been huge supporters of the arts, and my mother was always encouraging me in the summers to spend my time with nonprofits that work specifically in the arts sector. So I was working with kids in low-income communities in Denver every summer and teaching them art and skills in art and what have you. So I was always kind of pushed into the realm of my interests, but my parents, I think, were absolutely terrified by the notion that I would like be an artist, because the vision is that you'd be like starving and broke somewhere with no real support. But I pursued a degree that I felt like could give me the skills to communicate my ideas effectively. And I felt like if I could do that, then I could do anything. If I could be a critical engager of the world, then I had the capacity to do meaningful work. Mm-hmm. So I think they always trusted in that.
And I imagine they were also supportive of you deciding to go to Yale, to one of the most...
Yeah, I mean, none of us thought that would ever happen. My mother was very much like, yeah, you shoot for the stars, baby, and I'm gonna support you. Like, you should always try for whatever the best is and throw your hat in the ring. You never, like, the worst that can come out of it is you end up, you know, in the same circumstances you're in now, which are quite fine in the spectrum of what life can be. Like, you're very privileged in many ways. And so I think none of us expected that a real acceptance would come. And once I got that acceptance, of course, everybody was like, if you get into Yale, you go. There was like no question about it at that point. But when we were driving on the way there with my 3 paintbrushes, I thought that that maybe was a bigger mistake than we were letting on. So
and what was it like? Was it, I mean, I'm sure there was a kind of a moment of shock and...
Oh, shock, horror, confusion, imposter syndrome, which is something that I still continue to feel even with the success and the visibility of my career at this point. But especially then, I felt lost, but I was a learner. My parents had raised me to be a learner, and I'm very passionate about learning and education as a whole and taking advantage of opportunities when they present themselves. So very early on, I went into that experience like, this might be my last chance to be around this many brilliant minds who care about art and making art as much as I do. So I'm just going to be a sponge and soak it up. I just listened my whole first year. I didn't speak very much in crits. I was an observer of the environment. I tried to understand the art speak that I was seeing before me that I wasn't familiar with, that I felt like there was a way that people were articulating their ideas that was different than my own. And I built a sense of confidence in knowing that if I wanted to describe my things, that the work that I was making in really plain terms, that is just as valuable as putting a lot of words to it. So I really built a sense of confidence, I think, by the end of that experience, because I had been beat down enough that you really do learn to stand on your own 2 feet by the end of it.
And is there like a moment, an event, or a person that you think or you remember as being like a wow moment, or like a moment in which they really help you kind of step up in your career and kind of show you the path?
Yeah, there was, so at the time, one of the deans, Sam Messer, and was also, and Rob Storr, but Sam Messer in particular, very early on kind of took me under his wing. He was like, you can't paint or draw to save your life, but that's okay. I'm gonna show you how, and there's room to grow, and I'm gonna like shepherd you along the way. And he really did that. I remember quite a few conversations. He would come into my studio, and instead of having conversations, he said, you just need more practice painting, that your classmates have had more time with the material than you have. So instead of us talking about your work, you're just gonna paint me every time I have a scheduled critique with you. And then we're just gonna talk about how you're going about making that painting while you're making it, which was a very fruitful experience for me. I think that's exactly what I needed. I needed to catch up. I needed to make a lot more bad paintings in order to figure out what good could look and feel like. And so that's a really particular moment.
what was your work like in school?
It was very similar to what it is now. I think that the greatest difference is that, if there is a difference at all, I was painting classmates, I was painting my environment, a lot of the nudes that came out of my, the Visible Man series that I first became kind of recognized for here in New York City, those paintings came out of my time at Yale, and they were paintings of people that I was meeting at the School of Drama. So I had a green chair in my studio that I would ask people to just like come and sit in, and they would hang out and I would paint from life. And then eventually I made the decision to grow in scale as I started to kind of embark on the journey of painting the Black male nude. And that was a really important decision for me, was like to scale up and to go into the homes of the sitters. And that meant that I had to kind of bring photography into view within the practice.
And since you mentioned photography, when you were in school, were you also trying other mediums like sculpture or photography?
I made a video once, and I very much remember this critique too, because I was like, everybody was giving me such a hard time about my paintings that I was like, maybe I'm not actually meant to be a painter. And that's, you know, a very common thing in graduate school. All my classmates were trying other mediums and sculptures. And I decided to make a video, and it was so bad that literally at the beginning of the critique, Sam Messer started that critique by saying, I know this thing is in this room and that you intended for us to talk about it, but I'm going to vote that we do not, that it's not actually worth our time. And I was like, fine. But in my head, I wanted to prove a point. I wanted them to like finally leave me alone to try other things. That I tried that other thing and we all got real clear that, you know, I should stick to my lane, that there was more potential for growth and growing within painting than there could ever be with video work. So I can promise you, at least at this
I want to watch it now.
Oh God, I did find it the other day. It's very, very, very.
And when you were at Yale, were you part of like an extended community of artists? I know, you know, it feels like being a part of a big family, but are some of your colleagues, or like colleagues at that time, still, you know, your colleagues now, or your friends, or how was the kind of the atmosphere in the school?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hyper competitive environment, and by nature, I'm not very competitive. And so that was really difficult for me, is that I sort of, the introvert in me, even if I am a very friendly and outgoing and care a lot about people, I pulled in a lot, I think, during all of my educational experiences. So even in undergraduate school, I was the leader of everything. I was the president of the Black Student Association. I was like the head of the, what was it called at the time? It was like the diversity and inclusion office. I used to do mediations on campus between, like, with disputes and stuff. So I always had like a very visible face, but my social life was very secluded to me in the studio. And it was very similar at Yale. I was always given, well, my friend Wade always joked with me that I'd have way more paintings than I needed for every crit. And even right before crits, I'd still be painting and people would be like, why don't you stop? You have like enough to show. But my mentality was very much like, I have to make up for this lost time. And I was the class president my second year. I ran admissions my second year. I was literally like the representative. So I was very involved and cared a lot about the systems at play and the relationships I was building. But I wasn't, and still am not, much of like a party or a socialite. But I saw my classmates as resources. And there's a small few that have followed me in my life now. As I mentioned, Wade, I was texting him earlier, and he's one of my best friends, and he was a year ahead of me. But I actually spent most of my time at the School of Drama. I found my oasis in dark rooms watching stories be told on stage. Like, it was a way for me to exercise my ideas in an exciting way that was outside of the pressures I was feeling in the studio. So I made a lot of friends in other departments.
That's wonderful. And
yeah.
Then, and after that, you moved to another sort of very well-respected and prestigious residency, which is the Suti Museum residency program. I think it was 2015.
Yeah.
How was that? I mean, of course, it's not a university, it's a different environment, but how was the atmosphere there? And I'm sure you worked very closely with the other artists in residency there. And how different was it to be in a museum in the heart of New York City?
I mean, when I first left Yale, everybody was either going to New York or LA. That was the sense I got from my classmates, was like, if you're graduating from a program like this, you follow it through by like gritting your teeth in New York City or kind of like spreading your wings in LA. And I had family. Well, my mom grew up in New Rochelle, and I have an aunt who lives on the Upper West Side. So for me, the easy answer was to move to New York because I had a support system already in place. And my goal was to like be here maybe 2 years max. And if all else failed, I'd just like move back to Denver and be an art teacher. Like I never really thought that getting into a place like Studio Museum would be in the stars for me, but I continually surprise myself with how naive I am. I just like have my head in the dirt sometimes. I'm just like so focused that I don't always see the potential for the movement that can transform my life. And the Studio Museum was one of those places that literally transformed my life. I was probably depressed. I was feeling that New York, like new York living, overwhelmed sense of being. I was scrounging around, basically, had this studio, everything just felt exhausting. And then all of a sudden, Studio Museum appeared in my life and provided me with a safety from the art world, from New York City itself, that I hadn't felt up until that point. I found home in Harlem. I literally found home in Harlem. I've committed to being in Harlem as a result of that initial move. And it started with feeling seen by my other residents. I've always thrived in very intimate settings, and that's exactly what Studio Museum provided me, was an intimate space to learn about the art world in New York, to meet people, and to kind of expand my practice.
And who were the other two artists? I don't remember right now.
It was Jibade Khalil Hoffman and EJ Hill. And EJ and I in particular became very, very, very close coming out.
Working in completely different mediums, right?
Oh, completely different mediums. I would just go over to his side and he'd like play guitar for me and like show me the sketches for this idea that he had, which was profoundly unbelievable to me, that he would use his body. He laid on a platform for the entire exhibition time. Like the entire show, he was laying on this platform. And I was so in awe of him, that entire experience, to have an intimate connection to someone who had the capacity to do something. We just learned so much from one another. I work in very traditional ways, and I learned a lot from the ways that he was working. And we found that ultimately our goals are not very dissimilar. We just use mediums in different ways to exercise those ideas about the world.
Have you ever collaborated with an artist in an official way? I mean,
not in an official way, no. I think that I always feel like I'm in collaboration with other artists in the way that we have conversations about the way that we're thinking about the world, or thinking about the work that we're making, or thinking about our practices. Like, I think being an artist is a very singular act, but it's also a very collaborative act, because we're always in conversation with each other, whether in actuality or theoretically. Like, there's always these conversations happening about how we're navigating our galleries or the commercial art world, or how we're navigating our studio practices and the support we need within them. That there's collaboration on a real emotional level, even if it's not in a physical form.
Sure. And I want to start also a slideshow with some images of your previous works. We don't have to talk about specific ones, but just so that our audience can look at some of your paintings. And let's talk about them. So I'd like to start by, do you have a routine? Do you go to the studio every day? I guess you are in your studio right now.
Yes, I am here right now. I just started coming back here about 2 weeks ago, which has been a breath of fresh air in the middle of quarantine. I didn't realize how much I'd missed the act of coming into a studio. So I have found through quarantine that I am not a person who could like step out in my pajamas and start working in the same room. Like, I think I need the separation. That much of my practice is that of a job. And there's like a real practice to the way that I have to execute the paintings, that I wake up, that I have my tea at home, that I change my clothes, and then I move into my physical working space. And once I transition into this physical working space, I can kind of function in the realm of thinking of my life and the work that I'm making and the practice as a whole. It's a practice space, and then there's my living space. So when I come in here, I think the first few things that I do, I often sit on my computer in I have like a little sitting area and answer emails for like an hour up until like noon. I'll do computer work. And then after that, I kind of change my clothes or put on a smock, or kind of transition again to standing in front of the paintings and getting to work. And I work in long chunks of time. So I like to get 3 to 4 hours in one sitting at the very least.
And walk us through the process. Do you work with sketches, with photographs? Do you have a very clear idea what the subject will be, or like what kind of intuition or intuitive process do you also embrace?
Yeah, so it's it happens a few different ways. So for the Visible Man series, or even the Practice of Freedom, the most recent body of work that I did featuring my students, I had a very clear intention of a body of work that I wanted to make, highlighting the lives and the stories of the students that I teach at Rutgers University in Newark. So I identified those students through a long kind of like interview process thing, because I needed to make it like a job so that I could figure out who specifically I was gonna paint. And then once I figured out who I was gonna paint, we set up dates, and I went to all of their homes and spent 30 to 45 to an hour with them, like a chunk of time, up to an hour. Some of them I would spend photographing them, getting to know them, asking them where they would want me to photograph them, that they had thought about the painting. And then those preparatory images get brought back into the studio. I might print 5 or 6 from the hundreds that I've taken in the time that I've been with somebody, but I'm printing 5 and kind of melding that experience into one image that is the painting. So it's not a one-to-one relationship between the photograph and the painting. I'll bring things in from the 3 feet to the right to be in the frame because they told me a story about it and said that that was important, that I really see the canvas as an opportunity to kind of reframe that experience. And the initial sketch happens on the canvas. I don't do preliminary sketches. I go straight from that photograph straight into paint. So I'll use a really watered down, well, it's not water, it's gamma salt. So it's a liquid version of the paint to kind of sketch and then erase and then sketch and erase until I build a composition that I like.
Do you ever paint from life?
No, not so much anymore. I think that to say never would be unfair, because who knows if sometime in the future there will be opportunities for that. But painting from life, what has challenged that is that I've become very interested in the landscape of the subjects and the spaces that they occupy. And in order for the space to be as integral as the person themselves, I have to go into that space. And so painting from life in that, like in that instance, I have to use photography as the liaison between kind of me going to where people are, as opposed to asking them to come to where I am. That's kind of a really important part for me.
And I'm interested to hear you talk about, who you're looking at in terms of other artists and other techniques. I know someone that you've often quoted is Alice Neel, and I'm curious, of course, I can see the connection with portraiture, but I'm also interested in her amazing use of color, which is so instrumental in your painting. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, Alice Neel was an early painter that I fell in love with. I was very familiar with the work of Ramar Bearden, Hale Woodruff, Jacob Lawrence, like Dawood Bey. His photography was something that really influenced me and continues to. I think my computer is sitting on top of his book, Seeing Deeply, actually, as we speak, and an Alice Neel book. So I should just look at what's underneath my computer. There's an Alice Neel book, there's a Dawood Bey book. It's like, those are the things that are constantly in the repertoire of my brain, like in my brain, and circling around, thinking about how we represent community and our relationships to space. And color is a huge part of that. For me, it's always been the case. My mother jokes that I used to spend hours trying to decide what color to paint my room. I had a periwinkle room, I had a yellow room, I had a red room. Like literally my room in her house is still like bright yellow, like lemon yellow. And she would always thought that that was like a very particular thing for a child to be attached to. But she kept a journal entry from me at 6 months old describing my like clear fascination for colors and cartoons, that she recognized in me at a very young age that I had a propensity to draw myself towards color, that I loved color. It has continually been the thing and that has brought me great joy in my life, and that I tend to be inclined to bring color into my everyday life practice. I'm always pushing to try to explore new relationships between colors, and the depth of color itself, and explore what it can bring when you really push or pull color into space.
And when you do this, when you talk about color, do you also experiment on sketches before, or you just do it on the canvas, on the final canvas?
So I do, that's also right next to me because I was looking at there, I use these things, I use color aids, which are glorified, overly expensive paint chips. That's why I tell my students, I'm like, just go to the hardware store and grab a whole bunch of paint chips. But they're like expensive versions of paint chips called color aids. And I throw them on the floor and I begin to just like pick up and pair. So the first color that catches my attention, I'll hold on to it. And I begin to grab colors that I think will complement. For example, in this painting of Jahi, I was thinking about the light, that lime green. I remember seeing and being attached to the lime green in his cheek first. And then I built the rest of the color palette kind of around that. Using color aids to help me define the colors in advance. That I do a lot of mise en place in my painting. I think really intently about how color is going to function in the painting before I actually put the colors together, mix them, and then use them on the canvas.
And talk to us a little bit about the people in your paintings. I mean, I think you often, of course, portray people. There is also, as you said, a very specific attention to the landscape or the surroundings, but let's start from the people.
Yeah, I mean, is there anyone in particular you want to talk about? Because I could just, I mean, I got
I think, I think we can also look at the pictures of your recent show at the gallery, because I love the fact that you painted your students.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. So when I graduated from undergrad with my degree in studio art, having studied sociology and anthropology, not knowing how to become an artist, I decided that the logical thing to do was to figure out how to teach, because I had spent my summers teaching art, that I was passionate about education. So I did teach for America for a year. And that year between undergrad and graduate school, when I prepared my portfolio to apply to Yale, I was making paintings of my students at that time. I was teaching special education. I was making these portraits of my students that I was really connected to, but then they kind of got lost in the ether. And I've now returned to teaching. I'm now finishing up my 4th year at Rutgers University in Newark, and my role as an educator is one that those who know me most intimately know my passion and compassion around that it is an integral part to who I am. And I always felt like when I enter the classroom space with my students, that I feel a sense of safety and connectivity with them that other people never really get to know. And I wanted to bring the kind of two worlds of my life, me as an educator and me as an artist, together into one space. And this show, in particular, The Practice of Freedom, was kind of taking all the philosophies that my teaching pedagogy is based really in, kind of seeing and entering the classroom knowing that the learning is existing within that space. It's not me who's bringing knowledge to them. The knowledge exists before I even get there. They are knowledgeable long before I appeared in their life, and kind of believing that my job is just to kind of coax that out of them, to turn the mirror onto the things that they already know to be true about themselves, but maybe lost confidence along the way. And this painting practice, particularly this show, became an opportunity for me to get to know them in a way that I hadn't known them previously. I entered their homes. So for example, the painting on the right-hand side of Karina and her mom with their arms around each other, sitting in the kitchen, I think they might have been the first people that I photographed in the process of this kind of series. And when I entered, her mom had cooked me an entire meal. I still talk to Karina about these black beans that were the best beans I think I've ever had in my life. And she told me the recipes sort of offhand, and I'm still thinking about them. So that experience was a really important one. I remember being in lower ed, and teaching 6th grade. It was very encouraged that you do home visits to get to know the families and build relationships. But once you enter undergrad or graduate school, there's this assumption that there's been a detachment from the family, that they're adults now, and that their sense of belonging is like just in the ether. So it was really special for me to go into all of their homes, and the relationships grew as a result.
Yeah, I remember at the opening of your show that so many of them were there, and
all of them.
I mean, they seemed to me completely moved and in awe. But was there any kind of interesting anecdote or a moving moment that you want to recall?
Yeah, I mean, there were so many. like you at the opening, particularly at Casey Kaplan, all of them were there and they were kind of standing in front of their paintings. But then most of these paintings also traveled to the new museum for the exhibition Within Reach. And that opening in particular brought some moments from the students that really affected me in particular. One being Emmanuel, who's featured at the very kind of center of this image in the middle. He arrived in the lobby of the new museum and he said that somebody recognized him and was like, oh, you're one of the subjects. And he was completely taken aback by being recognized. And they said, well, we'll bring you upstairs. So he got kind of brought upstairs by this person who recognized him. And he said he entered that space and that although he felt outnumbered in terms of him being maybe as a person of color in the space, he felt outnumbered by the number of people in the room and the people in the space, but that he felt a sense of belonging that he had never felt before entering a museum space, that he would look around and he would see all his friends and be like, oh no, I got this. Like, I got Emmanuel, Jahi over here, Consuelo over there, Jenna over there. This is my house all of a sudden. And that's a pretty profound experience. And he told me that the week after we went as a class to go see the show, he told me in class, and he had been at the opening and he told our class. He just graduated a few days ago. So he was telling me about how profound that experience was for him. And that meant a lot. I mean, it's really kind of overwhelming seeing those kinds of reactions.
Of course. I think you could really feel it in the room at the opening.
Yeah.
You know, I'm interested in your teaching because it's something that has always fascinated me. Artists like teaching artists, so I'm curious to learn, like, what have you learned from your students?
I think the thing that I learn the most frequently is to not be so concerned with myself and whatever I think is most important. So it's pretty humbling to be an artist is a very egocentric act, that it's very involved with the self, my sense of self and time with myself and my kind of feeling of my need to show the way that I see the world through the act of making work and thinking that is valuable, that it's very self-involved. And being an educator for me is the balance that is necessary in my own kind of practice of kind of engaging and giving back, that I've always been kind of raised and thought of giving back as a huge part of who I am. And the thing that they teach me the most is the ability to kind of stand in one's 2 feet with a certain amount of confidence and knowing that everything's going to be all right in the end and that nothing can really happen without a community. The way that they take care of each other continues to astound me. There can be a student who has come in because they've had some kind of traumatic instance at home and everybody will come to their rescue. And I think that that's always a beautiful example of what humanity could be and should be. And I see those kind of essences of what true humanity, the power of like our tenderness in the classroom. So I think I've learned and continue to learn how to be myself every time I enter the classroom because they give me the room to do that I feel confident all over again every time I'm in there. I also see in the way that they make the freedom and the uninhibited way that they're just like, here I go, I'm gonna make this painting. I don't know what this red mark is, but we're gonna figure it out later. Like reminding myself that there's freedom, why I loved painting in the first place, that things don't always have to be so serious, that there can be real joy in the process as well.
Are you still in touch with your very first class?
Yeah, I mean, I just got a recommendation ask literally this morning that I looked at from Zamar, who was one of my first students, and Jenna, who was featured in the show. She is the only student who I've had every single semester that I've taught at Rutgers University in Newark. She's the one with sitting kind of on a rock with the flowers behind her. And she was there the first semester that I taught, and she just graduated a few days ago. So it was, the two of us actually got emotional on a Zoom call just a few days ago because she and Emmanuel called me the day of their graduation on Zoom, just to kind of like check in. And that's what I thought it was actually, but instead I got cornered into them expressing their love and gratitude, and I became very emotional. So I'm just so proud of them.
Are you still teaching these days?
Yeah, I mean, we were teaching remotely, but our semester ended. Yeah. So
what does it look like?
It's a nightmare. I mean, it's sort of crazy to teach painting remotely. I went into kind of literally we're just trying to save lives and each other at this point. So it was triage the end of the semester. That's kind of how I looked at it, that they all a lot of them are immigrants and coming from low income families. They're working full-time jobs. Even they are the essential workers in their families and needing to work. So I had to be really accommodating to whatever their needs were. So I just created basically a lecture series. I invited Erin Gilbert and Amy Sherald and Genevieve Gagnard. I just like reached out to all of my community and said, hey, will you guys spend 30 minutes with my class on such and such day? And so that ended up being a really amazing experience. Nina Chanel Abney, we had some really great folks.
I want to move to the Highland Project and
yes.
show another little video, always from your documentary, because I think it's a great introduction to, it gives a sense of how you interact with your subjects, which I think it's very important for the Highland Project. So let's watch this couple of minutes.
I was walking around shooting at night, and Louis and Atha were like packing up their stuff. So while I was taking the pictures, at some point Louis asked, like, what's going on here? Are you an artist, a photographer? What brings you to Harlem?
Oh, you did.
And I was like, oh, I'm actually a painter. I'm doing this project, blah, blah, blah. And they were like, oh, yeah, we'd love to participate. They had phenomenal energy from the beginning.
Y'all turning this into a photo shoot. I ain't mad at it. I make use of it when you got the camera.
The actual moment of me photographing someone is that speedy moment. I'm in and out with them. But I get to spend the most intimate time initially by myself in the studio, re-engaging with what I felt from someone in an instant.
So I think we're gonna get a photo of your project for the Highland, but how does it feel to have one of your paintings enlarged to I think 50 by 30 feet wide on one of the most visited parks in your city?
It's insane. Cecilia, like literally, I think when you first approached me about this project, it was like, yeah, okay, a mural. Then the day that I saw it being done, I was totally astounded by what they were able to achieve and how familiar the brushstrokes felt, that I felt like I got to re-engage with my way of mark making on a different level that I could have never imagined. Then also, like, completely aside from the painting, to have this for Falu as an immigrant to the States, as somebody that I've built a really meaningful relationship with, whose t-shirt reads, I'm not interested in competing with anyone, I hope we all make it. Someone who was one of the first people I met in Harlem, but because I was like so centered on painting men at that time, my tunnel kept me from kind of giving her the light that she really deserved. And I had come back to her saying, I think the time has come for me to paint you. And in 2017, I made this painting of her and her brother. And she actually was just texting me like, just actually right now, because she just showed up at my house to deliver masks, because she's like a designer and she's now designing masks for people. So I have something waiting for me from her, but that goes to show that the relationships that I built have gone far beyond what I could have ever imagined in those first instances of saying hello, that she and I have been in constant contact as COVID has been going on, making sure we have each other's back, because she's a neighbor in sorts, that she lives 20 blocks from me, but still she is my neighbor in essence. So it's unreal.
More about them and about her.
Yeah, so she first, this photograph was taken and this painting was made representing her in front of, she had a stand or, a table that she sold the hats that she designed and jewelry right in front of the Burger King on 125th, which is maybe 2 doors down from the Studio Museum in Harlem. And she was somebody who always smiled and said hello as you walked by. And so we had kind of built this repertoire of kind of people that you see every day and acknowledging. And it was that relationship with her that really sparked my interest in photographing and building relationships with people on the street in Harlem. But she was on this particular day with her brother who was in town from Senegal. And I was walking by and he came out, the sun was setting. He came out from this like dark awning and was like, hello, like I'm Falu's brother. I was like, what is this? Like he looked like a god. And I wanted to represent the like deep blue in his skin. I wanted him to feel as ethereal as I felt in that moment with him in the painting itself. And he was regal. He was on his way to the airport, which was, the timing was divine intervention. I don't know how else to put it. To have the opportunity to capture them together was a real gift for me and for her.
Is it your first public art project?
Oh, this is absolutely my first public art project. The biggest, without a doubt. It's amazing. I mean, I can't wait for the Highline to reopen. And even in the short time that it was up, the amount of love that I was getting on Instagram or seeing people, there were a few days that I went and just like sat on the steps and watched people go by. It's a pretty phenomenal thing to watch people engage with the space in that way, that they're backing up, that they're looking down and looking up. I think the Highline provides so many beautiful opportunities for that.
Have you heard like a strange comment or something that kind of shocked you?
Actually, I haven't. But I'm sure they've happened. Mostly like the strangest moments to me are like when people are like, oh, that's cool, let's just take a selfie. You know, like they don't really get the context, but they're like, that's an interesting thing and I want to be a part of it and take a picture. Those are always weird moments where you always wonder how much people take in. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they don't need to take in a whole lot to feel the experience of feeling a part of something. And that's the most kind of special part for me.
And what is the relationship, like thinking about public space? Of course, the painting portrays like a street scene in Harlem, and then here we are on the Highland, one of the most, beloved and visited parks. Like, so how do you relate these two very iconic New York places?
Yeah, well, I think at this time in the world, specifically to be representing a woman of color, an immigrant, so centered on an iconic street, and so accessible. I think the thing that first comes to mind with the beauty of participating in a project like this is that it literally becomes for everyone, that Falu can just walk on by with her friends and family and there's no restriction. Well, there might be, I guess, post-COVID, but no restrictions in essence of like how many people can come up there or not, or who she brings or doesn't and how she engages with it. That there's a sense of belonging when it's on the street, and that's a really special kind of sense of engagement. It's about accessibility. It is the most accessible way art could exist. And it's just a part of our everyday lives, that we don't have to buy it. We don't have to go into an institution to view it. We just kind of get to live with it.
I mean, we look very much forward to seeing it too. Also, you can actually see part of it from 22nd Street.
Yeah, somebody did send me a picture from the street, like the corner, you can see the tops of their heads, I think.
But I want to show and share with our public also some of the production photographs, because as everything on the Highland, also the installation and production of artworks is very public. So you see here a sequence of the installation phase, which involved painting the previous mural white and then started tracing the profile and the outlines of your paintings and then rendered it in color. We also have some other pictures that our amazing photographer Tim Sheng takes, sneaking up on the rooftop of the building. And then here you see the painters that work for Colossal Media, matching exactly the color of your painting with the color of the murals. I really love these amazing paintings, these amazing pictures, but also it's always a very, very public event. You see how many people are watching, and this was also in the midst of December, so it was pretty cold, and people spent hours on the sitting steps watching the act of painting this giant mural. I think we also can share with you a fun sort of time-lapse video that we captured, where you can see the entire process, which I believe lasted about a couple of weeks. So this is the Dorothy Ayanone painting that was previous your work, and then here you see the team drawing the outlines of the painting, and here they come with colors. And it's a really incredible experience to witness. You see it also the weather on the Highland. I think here it's snowing. So they're like really brave. They just, you know, face any kind of weather. But it's an incredible canvas for artwork. So. And you can see these videos on our website in case you want to see it again. But I want to maybe just wrap up by asking you a couple of questions about now. And of course, you had a tremendously busy year with your traveling show, your gallery show, the new museum show, and then the mural on the Highland. And then all of a sudden, the world stops. So how are you, readjusting? Is this global crisis really affecting the way you're thinking of your work? Not just your routine, because of course that's obvious, but are you thinking of that in terms of the content of your artworks as well?
Yeah, I think that this has been a really jarring time for us all. And you're right that I was doing, especially when you list everything like that, like I was definitely doing the most, and I was functioning at a really high level of sprint. Like I feel like I was sort of just about to gasp for breath, that I could see that I was going to crash if I didn't kind of figure out how to level myself out. And this opportunity, quite frankly, emotionally, has definitely given me the opportunity to pause and to reflect and to recenter the practice in a way that I think all the other goings on had kept me from being still here, that I can be still now, that I get to think about the landscape of my life and the way that my environment directly influences my practice. And the practice has always been centered around my observance of space and time and the people within that space and time. And I see that the practice will evolve into that there might be more reflections of work such as Amina, where there's not a physical body represented, but there's multiple faces on the front of a door, or even Memorial, that a painting like that feels particularly poignant in a moment like now when there's been so many lives lost, where we're unable to point to who and where and when, but we know and feel the gravity of that circumstance. That now I'm really thinking about how the people that I have seen during this time, what that means, and how I could potentially honor and respect and pay tribute to them. And I've been making a lot of the subway paintings. I had tons of these images, and have had the opportunity to paint from home before I was able to come back to the studio. So I was kind of painting on our dining room that I took apart and turned into my studio space. So I've really kind of felt free in some ways to like begin again and to truly recenter why it is that I do what I do. And it's always been about kind of putting those less visible in the front and center of our kind of purview. So it's going to take a lot of different forms, I think. And I'm personally kind of excited to see what it brings, even if it's intimidating and that my practice is centered around the public and the public is hiding in their homes. But I think there are opportunities to enter their homes as well. So it's not impossible. A lot of us are thinking about our homes now more intimately.
Very true. I have a question from the audience. I love your work, energy, and your excitement and dedication to what you do. I'm wondering how it feels to be a representational painter, portraitist in the art world today.
Oh, how does it feel? It feels exciting right now. This is like the moment to be a part of a conversation around representation and to be pushing the boundaries of what representation looks and feels like and who can be represented within what frames. And so I feel really excited to be a part of a community of artists and practitioners who have dedicated their practices towards seeing their environment and re-representing it in the frame of their practice. So for me, it's painting. I love it. I feel really excited by it.
And then a follow-up question, can you talk about the use of text in your paintings and if there is any kind of secret message?
Yeah, that's a good question, especially in the painting of the Bay Falls. Like, there's this really intricate relationship with text that has nothing to do with me and everything to do with the way that the communities around us use language to, I think, honor and protect themselves at any given time. That we all choose to put, you know, whether it be a sticker on our chest or a t-shirt on that says, I am brave today, or whatever it might be, that we use language in our lives to express the way that we feel about our environment and the people or the things around us. And so the language in all the paintings is always exactly what existed in the world. I'm not putting any secret messages. I'm just allowing people the time to slow down enough to re-observe the language that's oftentimes already in front of them in their day-to-day existence or commute.
And maybe I'm just going to read the last question. It's about scale. So is scale and size of space you feel an integral part of what you create? I think it's interesting also thinking not just of the mural, but going back to when you started enlarging your canvases.
Yeah, so it's definitely been an integral part. When I made the decision to scale up in graduate school, when I was painting the nudes of Black men in their homes, I was thinking really explicitly about their bodies feeling like they could exist in space in their entirety, that they could step out of the frame of the canvas and exist in the world that we live in today, that they could not be ignored. I think I also really selfishly or not enjoyed the fact that people would have to make room for my paintings, that people would literally have to make space for these Black and brown bodies to live with them, that they had to be conscious about their decision to invite them into a space that they might have or own or whatever occupy. And that if they're going to bring them in, that they have to make room for them and that they will live in that space in their entirety. So there's my sense of humor, and then there's this like practical, thoughtful decision about how I can use all the tools in my toolbox to convey whatever it is that I'm trying to convey to the viewer.
Thank you, Jordan. This was amazing. It was such a thoughtful conversation, and we all look forward to enjoying the amazing mural as soon as the Highland open and during the winter and next year. So I'm going to pass it back to Robert for some closing remarks.
Thank you, Cecilia.
Thank you. It was magical watching both of y'all. Y'all both have an amazing energy, and it's fascinating to think about you as an introvert, because you convey so much. And I sort of feel the same way when I took the little quiz and I realized I was an introvert, I was shocked. But you know, someone said you can live an extrovert life, but be an introvert. But just how much you give, how much your paintings give, and how much you give, it's incredible. It's mesmerizing to look at your work, but also just hear you communicate. So thank you. And thanks for giving the gift to the Highline. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. This is the last in the first 3 of these that we're going to do.